Hi, I'm Gene Bergman, Ward 2 City Councilor, and welcome to Burlington Progressives TV. It's our monthly show, and I am really pleased today to have two wonderful guests from the City of Burlington, the Mayor, Elma Mulvaney-Stanek, and the Planning Office Director, Charles Dillard. We have worked together, us for decades, us for what seems like decades, but is the years that you've been here, and I have really valued our work together, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do this work. And we're going to focus today on housing. It's a secret. It's a giant secret that we have a housing problem here. Some have called it a housing crisis, and it's something that I have dealt with actually since I've done community work in Burlington, starting in like 1973 when I was a housing tenant rights organizer and stuff. So I've seen this over the years. What I'm hoping that we can do, and then I'm going to be quieter, is to talk about the need, to talk about who is suffering, who is benefiting or profiting, the values that we bring as progressives. Elected, I'm very pleased that you were elected as a progressive. So the values that we bring to this work, and then we flip to sort of what we do with it. The opportunities for action and needed changes in policies that are current, but also some that may be further down the line, the specific ideas that you've got that are on the table right now in what I've categorized as the immediate future. And then whatever tools we've got. And this is not, I lay out this list, but it's not necessarily linear. So.
Great. Well, thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Councilor Bergman. I always enjoy having a conversation with you, and it's fun when we get to televise it, to really talk about the fundamentals of what does pragmatic, progressive leadership look like for the city of Burlington, with, in particular, our housing crisis. And I do use the word crisis. And I would actually say, just out of the gate, talking about the values and the perspective that I think progressive leadership brings is really noting the fact that some might call it a secret or unknown that we are living through a housing crisis, but to me that shows privilege that people walk through this world and then this local community if you aren't aware of the housing crisis, because those who are living and breathing that crisis every single day very much know the crisis that we're living in. And those are renters, those are working folks who cannot afford to save up to buy a home, even a very modest and small home. It's also, though, on the other side of it, folks who are on fixed incomes and seniors trying to figure out how to transition out of perhaps a 3-bedroom home to downsize and to figure out how do they sustain themselves on probably a very small pension or whatever they might have for a fixed benefit like Social Security. So those folks who are in our community and living and breathing this crisis every day. And so one of the things that I'm very proud of and excited about the housing strategy that we have announced back in January with my administration is really putting people first in how we talk about housing, how we talk about the solutions, the policy ideas, things that we're trying to put in place right now in the immediacy, and then the stuff that's going to take a bit longer, but all with people in the middle, the city as a leader, as the voice of the people, right? And really flipping some of the patterns we've had as a city prior, which has really been led by private developers or folks who have a certain type of housing they're going to put online. And I think the default that has sometimes been any housing is good housing. Well, I would argue any housing leads us to market-based housing, and because we don't have other controls yet in policy to limit the amount of capital profit that people can make on housing, that creates a really untenable situation when we're trying to make sure that we can remain an affordable community that maintains the economic diversity that makes Burlington so great, but also brings the housing that we need of all kinds online, but specifically for folks who need affordable housing and real affordable housing, not simply just for the most low-income people in our community.
Yeah. And Charles, we were just at a meeting of a lot of folks who are developing the city's new, I continue to call it a master plan. It's a comprehensive plan, right? That's what the law says. I date myself in this stuff. And so we saw a lot of statistics in there. So maybe you can think about and talk to us about some of the statistics. We don't have any slides on this, so we're just gonna talk.
Yeah, sure.
Sometime we'll come back with slides and some more demonstrative.
We should, because
evidence.
planning actually has some of the most
We
beautiful
will-
slides.
We do.
I
I will admit.
tell the other departments that
it's
really
quite all right.
fantastic.
It's great. But to just talk about some of the statistics that relate to the demographics, the change in the city, because we've had an influx in rich people.
Yes.
And that has an impact on housing prices. So
Yeah, we are steeped in this data, aren't we, Councilor Bergman?
you can call me Gene, please.
Gene.
Actually, thank you.
He's of the
normally
people.
do.
I can't help it, right?
Yeah, so there's so many angles that we could look at this from. The state does a housing needs assessment that tells us what segments of our population are really most in need of housing and how our own housing supply in Burlington is or is not accommodating that. And what the housing needs assessment is telling us is that the majority of our households are one or two people living in a home. And the plurality of our homes are actually large homes, 3+ bedroom homes. And so the mayor mentioned this earlier about one of our struggles, but this is also a big opportunity, is finding homes for people to downsize into, which will then open up more family-sized homes, which we absolutely need. That's one of the other things that the needs assessment tells us, is that we are not accommodating families in our community, especially families of New American populations and other specific populations in the community. So those are two of the sort of areas of need. And then you mentioned income.
Without getting too much down that hole, at least right now. So when we look at a house for those families, the number of bedrooms, sort of the size, and sort of the price points, what are we talking about?
Yeah, the median home sale price in Burlington today is above $500,000. I think it's about $515,000.
It's crazy.
So a 20% down payment on that is more than $100,000. And that would mean that to afford that home and to compete on the market, you have to have a lot of capital and equity already built up. And for many people in the community, obviously, people new to the United States, building up credit or just trying to establish a new economic foothold, that's going to be nearly impossible. But even for a large swath of the sort of middle income folks in Burlington, that is also not attainable. We are becoming, if not, if we haven't already become, a community where you can compete on the market for housing if you make lots and lots of money, or you don't make a lot of money and therefore you qualify for affordable housing that is subsidized. And so that vast middle part of the population simply can't afford to own a home and even struggles to rent, with the rents being where they are. You mentioned demographic shift, and I think we did see a big change in our community in 2020 with the pandemic. And there was an influx of very high income households with remote work who were able to come to this community that has so many amenities. And I think we all recognize Burlington is a place that people want to be in. And that only drove up the cost of housing even more. We saw a related decrease in the number of households earning less than $50,000, and an even sharper one, I think, of households earning less. And so we have become a very uneven sort of population demographically, and that is a big challenge for us. There are obviously knock-on effects throughout the economic sort of system of the city, as well as transportation and parks. And you mentioned the planning effort we are doing, and I think it's important just to think holistically about all of this.
Absolutely. I mean, my recollection from the latest numbers that I've seen from 2023 are that like 73% of the people are making under $80,000.
Yeah.
Of all of the taxpayers in the city of Burlington.
That's right.
And then the next swath gets you up to like 90%. So we've got a big demographic problem. So
I'm going to add one thing about demographics I think is really important, because we sometimes in Vermont can over-focus on the economic disparities that very much exist that we've talked about so far, but there's a racial disparity also in our housing in Vermont in particular. And I don't remember this factoid, but it is, I think, in the single digits in terms of Black homes owned in the city of Burlington. And when you think about generational wealth and how institutional racism shows up, not only in how wealth has been distributed or lack thereof over decades and centuries in this country, but also the systematic, intentional redlining and whatnot has happened. I mean, Burlington and Vermont is not immune to that. And when we think about the additional barriers that face when you have economics and racial disparity and all those other pieces that I just mentioned, we have a lot to work on to really create equitable access and to also think about how we can be in the driver's seat as a public entity of making sure that we remove barriers and move people into housing and frankly do justice work in this work as well. Writing some of the, again, long-standing sort of the tentacles of what institutional racism looks like. It looks like today why you look around your demographics and you wonder like, wow, a lot of households are not reflected in home ownership in our city.
Yeah, I mean, we have, probably Winooski has got a more diverse, but I think that we're probably second in the state of diversity, and our high school is really diverse, and it's really important to understand, and it would be good to bring facts to actually lay this out. But the number of brown and Black people who are working and still are suffering from this. I mean, this is it's sort of like the tip of an iceberg of the fancy word is precarity, you know, the people just living on the edge, working people who just, you know, I remember, I was saying this today when I worked at the Free Press in production, right? And we organized a union, and then we're trying to increase our wages through a contract that actually failed. And we complained about not only how low we were getting paid, but also how much they were making, and their answer was, what does what we make have to do with what we pay you? We pay you what we have to. Working people have been, you know, trying to get their fair share of the pie for a really long time. And, you know, brown and Black folks are, you know, suffered the double whammy of that. And it reflects itself in the lack of generational wealth and in the, you know, just the tenuousness of their housing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to get into the policy, but it's why, you know, as we've been building a cross-department team within the city structure to work on housing, so it's not just our Office of City Planning or CEDO, we're being more expansive in who we're bringing to the table to help design and think through what we do next. And that's why we have our Director of Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging as part of that team to intentionally make sure that we're centering the conversations of equity as we build out short-term, medium, and long-term housing strategy.
Yeah. So let's move. Let's sort of cap the need and try to maybe make that real for folks in terms of sort of the current need, what we need to be doing now, but then pivot from that to the opportunities that we have both for actual development of housing, but also any policies that are going to hopefully unleash that.
Yeah. Do you want to start with the really scary number? The lofty goal. I'm trying to make dramatic television for you.
Scary,
we have a very
We
scary
like
number out there.
we like dramatic.
And I got it wrong last year at my State of City. I got it right this year at my State of City. So do you want to explain where that comes from?
You gave the high target, which we can aspire to that.
I'm an overachiever, so yeah.
Yeah, the state has established housing targets for every community in Vermont, and Burlington's target is just under 7,000 units, new homes by 2050. And just to put that in context, we've been building in Burlington about 77 units per year in recent years. To hit that target by 2050, we'll have to build at 4 times the rate, so 280 something units a year. And obviously that's just a number, and this is something I say to everybody, but the real goal here is to bring the material cost of housing down for everybody. Not just the folks who are struggling or even unhoused right now, but for everybody. We have to think about other added costs that people are facing in their daily lives. You know, transportation is a big one. You know, insurance and taxes are others. And to have a thriving community, housing has to be affordable for everybody.
And stable.
That's right. Yeah, so 7,000 is the goal, is the target, and there's new state legislation actually that is being more explicit about what that target means and how we have to plan for that. We have to include that plan in the city, that number in the city's comprehensive plan, and we have to therefore also identify barriers to reaching that target and the strategies that we're going to take to meet it. So we have a big task in front of us, but there is a lot of optimism despite what we've been seeing in recent years.
So is there more detail in terms of what the breakdown of that 7,000 looks like?
What it might look like. Well, I mentioned the housing needs assessment, and that tells us that we do need to build more small units today in the next few years to accommodate some of these aging households that need to downsize into more accessible homes, into smaller spaces with fewer maintenance needs. We also need to accommodate young people who are moving to the community and working in all different sectors, folks who are forming households. That's what the needs assessment tells us today. But one of the questions we're asking the community through this comprehensive planning process is, what kind of community do we want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do we want to be a community where families can thrive? And what does that mean for housing? And I particularly think that it would behoove us all to find ways to house all kinds of households in our community, especially families. We're building a beautiful new high school in Burlington, and we need students to fill that high school who will become the future leaders and members of this community. And so, yeah, specific needs, the mayor mentioned some already, but there are. We can talk more about the strategies and the policies that we have for addressing niches in the housing market. And I think that is just an important point, that there are very small segments of the population who have very specific housing needs, and we're going to be very intentional about covering all of those bases.
Yeah, I mean, the data that we saw this morning indicates a pretty significant drop in the number of young people in the city, under 18-year-olds, which is the high school. And we've seen that reflected in other figures from the school department. So you build a giant and beautiful new high school powered by a heated and air conditioned by a thermal energy network that does us good for our climate. But if we have it half open, it creates, problems that we've had in the past where we have extra, we have these school buildings that are laying vacant, and so it's a real problem. And so it does lead to the fact that we've, in a way, in my mind, we've got to sort of address a current need, but you can get locked into that path. And so you've got to figure out a way to get the family housing and the range of housing, and then for us to moderate or to somehow deal with what is necessary competition for the same spaces, the same size units, a 1 and 2 bedroom for an older person, but it also is for a person graduating college and trying to, maybe, with people or roommates, and how that all works out. And then what we do with the bigger houses where it's incredibly profitable. Let's move to
Well, I just want to say one other thing I just want to be really clear about, because the city is also a big employer, and we see this in a lot of even small employers, is that when we think about our existing workforce and those we're actually trying to recruit to either stay in Vermont if they're a recent college graduate or whatnot, or young people growing up in this community, we have to make sure that we have housing that's of all economic sizes and shapes, because we're losing people. And even currently, we talked about this a while ago, but some of our existing city staff commute an hour plus into Burlington because they cannot possibly afford housing not only in Burlington, but not even in the county. And so that is the opposite of what we want to do for climate. It's the opposite we want to do for quality of life for folks that we're trying to recruit and support to be city staff. And this, you can insert any employer into that scenario. And we've had people turn down jobs with the city because they could not find housing in your department, for example, which is, and it's real. And that person, as I recall, had a young person in their life, a child, and I think the combination of housing and sometimes lack of finding childcare is real. So our job is as city leaders is to imagine into not only what is possible, but to build a path to make it actually a tangible reality. And so that's why I'm excited with some of our strategies that we're cooking up and learning from other communities and cities as well, because that is the best. I think plagiarism is the best thing. When you see smart progressive policies elsewhere, we should be borrowing those ideas, learning from, improving upon all those things, because other communities are certainly figuring this out, and that's our charge right now.
Excellent. So let's pivot to that, but I want to start in terms of the opportunity and the things that we're going to, I use the word steal, but borrow or just copy and that is UVM. UVM has been a major driver in my mind of our housing crisis and the lack of housing. But we have a new administration there. You've got a decent relationship with the new president, and she brings into this work here an understanding of housing. So let's talk.
I'd love to talk about that, because I think it's so important especially because I used to be this community member who would just say, UVM, you're the major reason for all of our housing woes. I think it's important to update our reality and look at the demographic trends of what's happening for undergraduate enrollment in institutions, but also understand who are the players now that there's a new administration up at UVM and a fairly still new administration here for the city. And one of the things I've been so appreciative with President Dr. Marlene Trump, who is that she very much understands that the well-being of Burlington and UVM are completely intertwined, and we have to have that perspective from day one, and we have. And I wouldn't even say it's a decent relationship. We have a really strong relationship, and I'm proud that she and I have both invested the time and prioritized that. When she came to Vermont last July, I was one of the very first meetings she took, because she was very purposeful in knowing and acting upon. And that's different than how the relationships, I wasn't mayor prior to 2 years ago, but that was a very different relationship. It was one that was very much, I think, locked in assumptions, locked in sort of the UVM being an island up on the hill, and then everybody else in the community, and it was adversarial. And when you have that kind of approach, when you have to sort of discuss policy and goals, and then also fees for service, which is one way we fund our essential services for the city, because UVM doesn't pay property taxes traditionally like other entities in the city. That's a voluntary relationship. And as a former community organizer, it's about relationships. That is a fundamental thing of how we move our community forward together, and that includes UVM. So Dr. Trump and I have literally, it's not even, I'm going to say it, we're not even turning a page. We're making our own damn book.
A new book.
We're making a new book. And I'm so pleased, because she worked with the mayor of Boise, Idaho in her last leadership role at the university out there. And that's where she just came from. And they are breaking ground this fall on a development project, which I'm now blanking on the name of, which was a collaboration, because there was a budding property that the city owned and the university owned, and they looked at their own assessment in that neighborhood, or in the city in general, on what housing was really needed. And the university needed graduate student housing, and the community needed housing for families. And I think it's housing for families specifically exiting homelessness. And they co-created this model, and they are building this building, and they figured out how to finance, and as I said, they're breaking ground this fall. And I am so excited about how we replicate that here in Burlington, because it's smart, it's responsive to the actual needs, and it gets creative on the capital stack, so basically the funding of how do you make something like that happen, because the city can be a partner. We bring some resources to the table based on access we have from our housing trust fund, but we can get really creative by leveraging this relationship when we look at them as partners and not as folks that we must force to do certain things from an old lens, I would say.
Sure. I mean, so you've got the Trinity campus, and there's been conversations about what to do with that and the density and how it interacts or interrelates to with the streetscape and all of that on Colchester Avenue. You've got their properties out by the Sheridan, or whatever it is called now these days, and we've had these conversations there, and also their redevelopment of the Waterman area and those big surface parking lots. So there are definitely opportunities that we've got, not let alone whatever other kind of inventory they've got either in Burlington or in South Burlington, maybe it's also Shelburne there.
Yep.
I forget where the dividing
One
lines
thing
are.
Charles has brought to the conversation as well as part of our comp plan or master plan, whatever word you want to use, is that it's not just about housing, it's about livability as we design the community we want 5 and 10 years from now. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit about intentional design of also green space and open space and livability of community.
Yeah, that's right. We often think about housing and talk about housing in a vacuum, but we all know the reality is couldn't be farther from the truth, right? I mean, where we put housing determines how we move around our community. We have so many folks, the mayor mentioned, who work in Burlington who cannot afford to live here and are living towns away, an hour away in some cases, and they're driving, and they are not walking and they're not biking, and that is not great for the climate. It's not great for their own health. It's not great for public health. And so similarly, with respect to parks and our recreation programming and that sort of thing, the more people we can invite into our community to live here, the healthier our park system will be and the programming budget will be. And obviously it goes without saying that the more people who can live in our community, spend money in our community, work in our community, supports the city's tax base and helps us fund this great community that we have. And so we are being very intentional now when we think about housing policy, where housing should be, what it should look like, how the transportation system fits into it, how open space fits into it. Housing should be a joyful place. Neighborhoods should be a joyful place for people to be, to move around in, to build community in. And we have a housing target, which is a number, but I think we need to even step back and just think about the fundamental sort of philosophical nature of what a home is to somebody and what a neighborhood is to somebody. And the best neighborhoods are those that are green, that have lots of trees, open space, places where all generations can thrive. You want to plan for children and for the oldest folks in your community to be able to live independently as they can. And so we want to be really intentional about that in our planning effort and make sure that we are not just building housing for housing's sake, but building community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the issues that all around the United States, including here, have had to deal with is NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And that's really because the nature, the character of people's neighborhoods is getting disrupted by what appears to be large developments. There are aesthetic, there are environmental, there are those community issues that people are concerned about. And and when you're secure in your own housing, then it becomes harder to empathize with the folks that are in need and also of all of the ramifications of it. So it's really important that we engage in this process in a way that acknowledges that and attempts to really build the vision of what we can do given the need, and that includes being conscious of the need, not just from a theoretical standpoint, but from an actual standpoint when it comes to taxation, when it comes to jobs, schools, et cetera. And the negative lesson that we had, and it's really fascinating, is the legacy program that Peter Clavell, when he was mayor, unleashed. Because in I think it was in 93, 95, I can't remember, he lost. Yeah, around maybe 95.
I'll
it was
consult
the second time.
The wall of mayors in my office.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, there was a 2-year gap.
Yeah.
And the proposal was to have a city of 66,000, right? And there were these huge planning meetings. People were envisioning, there were well over 1,000 people who participated. But when it came to, starting to embed this in our planning, there was an outroar, an uproar. And it was really kind of crazy, and we retreated. as a result of that. So
I always learn something when I talk to you, Gene. I didn't know that part about our history.
Yeah,
of course.
yeah, yeah.
I won't tell you how old I was when you.
It would be interesting. Maybe we'll bring Peter in and sit down and he can like feel bad about like having to get. I mean, he got pilloried. It was terrible.
Yeah. We don't want to repeat that.
We do not want to repeat that,
Yeah.
and yet the answer is not the status quo.
Absolutely, and I think that one of the things, and again, I would love to have that conversation with former Mayor Clavel. Maybe you can have dueling mayors and your next show.
No dueling. We just sit down and have this fine
conversation. It's deep solidarity. I'm not going to. The word. Deep solidarity of how hard this stuff is, but because it is really hard, right, to change status quo and to work through. There's like tangible economic barriers, but there's also, to be frank, like emotional and otherwise barriers around why people get to this NIMBYism kind of mentality. And one of the pieces of our strategy, I call it the democratizing piece of our work around putting people in the driver's seat, is also thinking about small development and individual development. Because I can understand, right, especially if you don't come from wealth, your whole wealth, especially for white folks who got a little bit further, than I mentioned before, around Black and brown folks. We have to go deep into history, but all the things that propped up people being able to build that wealth, it was all wrapped up around your home, and that is your big nest egg that you can then retire based on, right? And so there's an economic insecurity and scarcity mindset that comes with the value of your home that you have poured all of your working years and your resources into, and if the neighborhood changes around you, et cetera, there can be a lack of information, understanding of what that means, what it is and it isn't. It's like a bit of a perception, but also reality to grapple with. And so part of how we're going to democratize one short-term tangible goal that we're going to implement next year, or this coming year, which starts in a couple months. I talk in fiscal years,
it's all the
basically.
same.
I know, but it's happening soon, y'all. It needs a better name, but we're going to make a housing shepherd role within the city. And what this person's role is to help get from concept to actually completion of a project. And that's very much specifically designed to support individuals and very small developers, which is a population of folks we have not focused on before. And the reason why I'm calling this out is I am talking about those individuals who, or households that have a parcel that's a little bit larger that could be added, like an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, a tiny house, a small structure that actually starts to bring more infill in. We had this great tool that came online mere days before I became mayor under the prior administration, which I am grateful to Mayor Weinberger and that council for doing that work. But we didn't have an implementation plan ready. So this whole ordinance change was designed to infill housing in the main corridor areas, not everywhere, just to be clear, but like the infilled, the key areas around our city into the new North End, along North Avenue, et cetera. And we didn't have that implementation plan. So this is the kind of work we're strategically concentrating on, so folks can have a little more roadmap. Like, how would you do that? Let's not have every individual have to figure that out. But the best part, back to values, is that then we help people build their own wealth in ways that also help the community's needs on housing. And I am so excited because that's a healthier community. And it's one where we can just reimagine community, and instead of like all the isolation that certainly the pandemic cranked up, but we can think about collective living in new ways. And there was one person who built the first passive house. You probably know who this person is, a Burlingtonian here in the Old North End, who built the first passive house, and they redesigned their parcel so there's multiple units, and they made a mini community. And to me, that's resilience. That is like the beauty of where we can lead. And I don't know how Mayor Clavel, navigated all that legacy work, but if we do the community building and like a good organizer while we talk about housing, this doesn't have to be scary, and we can move through that emotional barrier that people might be holding.
I think that's a big difference.
Yeah.
I think we were looking at it from a very high level, and it scared people, and you look at these pictures of major high rises. But it speaks to the fact that we have a reputation, for example, that Burlington is hard to develop in. I don't think it's justified, but I think it's real. And so being able to assist people in that. There are people who, the new North End is, a low resident district, right? And there are these major yards that are out there where ADUs or small little places could be developed, but that is really hard for people to get their hands around. And so, combined with the economic support, that is actually real economic support. It's staff person is
Yep.
is real economic support. But I think about it in relationship to the economic development work that we have when we've done it most successfully. We have a revolving loan fund. It's not a one-shot thing, so it's not all gone and into the pockets of a few lucky people, but it gets to come back and continue to generate wealth. And then we've got, small business development folks. I mean, we just had this restaurant week in the Old North End. And you might get a chance to go out and speak to folks, and it was really, really successful. And that was an idea that Johanna in Cito came up with.
Shout out to Cito.
And I mean, it was really, really important and good. People, because I asked everybody when I went out, I mean, how this was working, and it drove business. And you just watch people, feel. I mean, I love my neighborhood. Right, I've been here for more or less the last 50 years, raised my family here, and it is that type of neighborhood. And so part of the housing development that we have to do has got to really build on what we've done right, what is right, how it organically came. This is, this is a neighborhood of immigrants, right? I mean, despite the fascists, attempting. I can't help. I get myself off.
Okay,
I can't. I can't.
20 minutes.
I mean, I got 40 minutes in before I went after them.
Record.
But yes, exactly. But I mean, it speaks to the need and the strength that there is when we've got people all around us that contribute to the richness that is us. And so that.
Well, I just also want to say that I want government to work. Local government is what we're talking about here, right? Local government needs to work for the people who live here, and it needs to support the people who live here and the people we want to draw in, right? And so rethinking some of our legacy tools is another piece of our strategy. And we've long had this housing trust fund, which is basically a pot of money that gets generated from a couple of different revenue sources, one being our tax on short-term rentals, which has been great and is pretty progressive, and it's in both the level of the fee that we charge for short-term rentals, but it also comes from when there's new development in the city of a certain size to fund, so we can make sure that we're building perpetually affordable housing. We have to dust it off a little bit though, because it has not been actually generating the actual physical affordable housing that we need. And so when you look into the even how the housing trust funds structured in ordinance and in our policies, we can be a little more expansive and creative in our thinking in terms of making sure that we're supporting individuals and small developers and rethinking how we've just tended to use it. And that's when I get excited around, again, having individuals feel government working to their benefit and really thinking in a cooperative and democratic way and trying. I think innovation is such an important part of what we are bringing forward in this housing policy and a lot of what we're trying to do in the city, because if we don't try, then we can't find that thing that will work. And we all know that the status quo is certainly not working. So we have to figure out ways that we can make government show up for people and help, again, working class folks in particular, build wealth, deepen roots here, and then support all of our newer Burlingtonians, the immigrants and refugees in particular, so that they feel safe and supported and can, as you were saying before, thrive in Burlington.
So put some of these new ideas for, say, the Housing Trust Fund on the table. What are you thinking about?
Yep.
Yeah, so the mayor mentioned sort of diversifying how we use the Housing Trust Fund. That might be seeding funding to help somebody build an ADU in their backyard, or even the neighborhood code allows us to build up to 8 units on any residential property. So if we can identify folks who do have a bit more land that can accommodate a bit more, can we be a partner in that development with the Housing Trust Fund? That's one way. I think we also need to look at different types of housing, cooperative housing, co-housing. These are models that have a strong history in Burlington and elsewhere in the country, and I think that there are many in our community who might be interested in that. But without a sort of easily identifiable financing source, it's hard to make those projects work. Can the Housing Trust Fund be a part of that picture? I think also, to her great credit, the mayor has identified the city reclaiming its role as a leader in building housing, and I think many communities across the country are doing this.
Yep.
And if we can utilize smartly certain pieces of land that the city does own, can we use the Housing Trust Fund in that way to build housing that is perpetually affordable and under which the city retains land ownership that will ultimately create a sort of just constant revenue source for the city going forward. I think these are some of the ways that we can immediately enrich the Housing Trust Fund and then help it become more sustainable over the long term to become a true revolving fund that can support a diverse sort of portfolio of housing.
Are there bigger financing issues? I know that in other places
course.
like Seattle, they talk about, they've, I think, bonded
Yes.
for major, so.
Yeah.
Well, I'm also wanting to get creative around utilizing, again, building our own wealth based on where we have money as a collective, meaning the city. So, for example, our pension fund right now just goes to Wall Street. And I want to make sure not only that it is safe and steady and well funded, of course, but how do we actually invest in ourselves? So we're in the early stages of exploring any of this, of course, but there are other Vermont communities even who have the same lofty goals or a version of them. They probably don't have this up to 7,000 that Burlington has. It's the privilege of being the biggest city. But they're looking at their own wealth. Again, how can they leverage that by using their pensions as an investment opportunity into something that is very smart and stable and helps to build our collective wealth in a new way. And I really appreciate when you talk about smartly and certain properties, but I also want to emphasize to folks, you would be amazed how much property the city owns within the city limits, And for us, we're definitely not talking about protected wetland space or conserved land. We have a lot of that, let's be very clear. But we also own random parking lots and very underutilized spaces that could be such smart opportunities for building housing that's building our collective wealth because we would own that housing collectively. And so, as I'm surprised we haven't talked about renters. You talked about fascists, but we haven't talked about renters yet. It's just been 43 minutes, but I think part of what I want to make sure the city is able to do is to help bring some smart rental policy thinking to the table as well, because 60-something% of people are renters. And if we become leaders in actually building rental units, we are the people's landlord. And we can actually be smart about what are the rent levels, who are we trying to house, who are folks who are difficult to find housing. ADA units, for example, are really hard to find in this community, but also thinking about, you talked earlier around multiple bedrooms for some of our larger families that really struggle to be able to find livable spaces. They might find a space, but then they're putting many people into one bedroom, and that is not a livable, vibrant community that we want to build. So I'm really excited about not only public land, but just being smart around parcels in particular. I announced Monday at my State of the City, we're going to do a parcel assessment as well, which is another immediate step we can take of looking at what are the underutilized properties in our community that may be publicly or privately owned, but then reactivate them or reactivate them for better and higher use that's to the purpose of serving our housing needs in the community.
Before we pivot to tenants, I just want to say that the more information that people have about the actual parcels, the better they can start to understand where they fit into the community. So the sooner we can put that inventory out, the sooner we can put it out in graphics and can make sure that the people who live in those or travel through those or are working there know that this is opportunity land, and that their needs can be met in part by us seizing that opportunity. So that's my ask for us to further that along. But let's talk about let's talk about renters.
Yes.
And we have actually the Progressive Caucus has actually put an idea on the table that I know that you all have thought about, at least Charles, in terms of the rental information hub information. We've also put the idea of a right of first refusal on the purchase, I think is what you call something that Washington, D.C. has got. So those are things that we have talked about over the last 2 years. The first one with the information hub is something that I think we could implement without the council and without sort of the politics that goes along with that. Yeah.
That's right, and the mayor hasn't mentioned it today, but she was invited to be part of a Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, and the sort of multi-department team that she mentioned earlier is part of that process of doing sort of deep engagement with the community and on issues. to remove barriers to housing. And that group, we have identified 8 core strategies, and one of those is to do something just like that, create a better digital space for renters in our community to get information about specific properties, about landlords, so that they can understand, you know, is this house that I'm considering signing a lease on one where there's been code violations or where there's been known problems with tenants, that sort of thing. And I think that is missing from the space right now, and that will help so many people in Burlington. Part of that work, just to get back to UVM a bit, we talked with a group of about 20 UVM students and just heard some of the stories about their housing experience. And I didn't know this, that, you know, within the second month of any new year, UVM students are really tasked with finding housing for the coming year. 10 months from now, do you even know you're going to be friends with those people anymore? I didn't know.
Do you even know what kind of roommate they are? You don't.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
and so this is a big predicament that creates a lot of unnecessary stress. And I think this is the kind of tool that if we can help stand up, we can really help people in this community find safe, secure, comfortable, and again, joyful housing.
I mean, it speaks to the lack of security that renters have, because the market has really moved to be driven by the UVM enrollment, the changes that happen. So now you've got this situation, and it wasn't like this up until the last, I think, the last decade, where everybody's housing is going up in for June 1st, and you got to rent it in September, right? 2 months after you've gotten there, and the rents are going to go up again. The market is really exploitive and extractive in its operation right now.
And it's not just students. I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
I also live in the Old North End, and like the desperation, though, where people who are living in, frankly, substandard housing, and whether there's code violations or not, we do our best. And I am so grateful that we have Burlington Code, because this does not exist elsewhere in the state. There's minimum housing codes for the state, but they're way lower, and they don't have the kind of investments that we have done as a city to make sure we do regular inspections, and there's a way to kind of phone in violations. But one of the challenges is the power imbalance between folks who are economically strapped for resources, staying in really, frankly, borderline unlivable spaces. And my kids go to an Old North End school, and like some of the families that they go to school alongside, I know are in substandard housing, but the families will not call the city because of the fear of eviction, the fear of rent going up, the fear of all these things that can happen, that have happened. And this is a sort of a tricky dynamic that we're trying to do as a city, and this is where this kind of, what was the word you were using? Not registry. System, information system.
That database.
It's public information to make sure that this is known, not only for the benefit of students, but folks to just know there's other options out there, and to frankly reward folks who are doing good, solid rentals, and there are good landlords out there, and we want to make sure that they are known. There's another piece of tax policy that this group has put forward. It was something I talked about in my campaign, another progressive moment, around how we can incentivize, again, the landlords who want to invest and are investing in not only their livable space that they are renting to the public, but also making sure that rents are stable, that they're not just simply charging what they know the market can bear, or can't really bear, but anyway, just charging what they can, but purposely keeping it, in line with the cost of living or even below. We can get smart around our tax policy locally and incentivize that with a tax credit or something like that. And to me, that is a way to start dealing with the absurd cost of rental. It's one thing about livability of the unit. It's another around the absurd cost, because rents have gone up by 40% or something. And I just could not imagine being a renter. And back to what I said in the very beginning, people's privilege show in this community, and even among some of our elected colleagues, frankly, when you haven't personally been experiencing what the current or even the last 10 years rental market is like, the Hunger Games level version of trying to find an apartment, stay in an apartment, afford an apartment, and all those other power dynamics, we do a disservice. Every year. It's such a disservice to the people who live here and who want to stay here when we don't actually put ourselves in their shoes and understand how we desperately need to fix this broken system.
So there is, so we're thinking of a some sort of a tax reform that would build in rent stabilization in exchange for a reduction or in the valuation of, or the taxes
Exactly.
of it. And
Yep.
I mean, it's similar to what the state has. You know, when you have perpetually affordable housing, right? Your assessments are your fair market value is reduced because of that. I mean, it's a reflection of that. And you know, we've got programs in CEDO that relate to lead paint remediation. And there are those, you know, when you get those benefits, you get, you know, some obligations. It's not just free money so that you can rip everybody off and, you know, to get as rich as you can, because that's just what the invisible hand of the market says. So this is something that we absolutely need to do. From my sense, we are not going to simply build our way out of the problems. You've got to mix it with a variety of tools. What other kind of ideas besides the just cause eviction in the which is stuck in the legislature, and other people's talking about rent stabilization, which it is time for us to be having on a broader basis, but those are longer, obviously longer term things. But other ideas for renters?
For renters,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we are taking a deep look at our inclusionary zoning program right now, and that is one primary way in which renters, especially those who qualify for affordable housing, are given access to homes. And so we want to look at this program and make sure it's still a strong way for people to have housing, but also identify ways that maybe it's blocking some development from happening that otherwise, you know, would help the community. Back to the sort of the city's role in being a leader in housing. Part of that, which is a really exciting piece for me, is changing the way the city procures development partners and finds partners that can help develop housing with. Traditionally, you know, the city will, you know, issue a call for developers to say, what's your proposal for this property? And you pick a developer, and Burlington is not alone. Most communities across the country have done this. You pick a developer, and the developer's ideas, they chase them down, and they either financially work or they don't. But there's very little in community engagement that goes into, you know, what exactly is being built, what does it look like, what are the homes like, how many family-sized units are there, what kind of community space is there. We want to sort of flip that on its head and sort of design a community with the community. And that's part of the democratizing development piece as well. And this is sort of standard practice in a lot of the world. We want to say, spend a good year or two with the community, you know, and we're going to try and do this in the South End project on the city's parcel down there on Sears Lane. Really get into things like, do you want cooperative housing? You know, how big should the buildings be? How much open space do you want? A playground? Do you want a basketball court? That sort of thing. Do you want community farms? That sort of thing. And then find a developer who's willing to work with us to build just that. And in that way, I think we can build community trust and use that as a model for development throughout not just the city, but the region. We've been talking with housing experts from, you know, from Boston about this concept for a couple of years now, and they're really excited about Burlington pursuing this, and that's just to say we have a lot of smart people working on this together.
That's excellent. You know, part of it is also engaging renters so that they understand that they've got agency and they're just not pawns being moved by somebody else. And so if you can engage folks in that, them being involved in the process then begins to for them to understand that engagement in the political process is where power and security and opportunity you know, lies. And so it would be really good, maybe even in our comprehensive planning process, for us to be able to start to activate those and to focus on renters. Because at one point when I started, there was a housing movement that had lots of renters being part of it, and we haven't really had that for a long way, and it's not in the interest of folks to to be unorganized. Through organization, there's strength and power.
Yep.
So that sounds really, really good. And we are going to be taking up the inclusionary zoning work. And so it's really important, I think, for us to understand, for people to understand that these regulations, getting rid of them does not make the problem better, because it just lets, the capitalist system operate in this invisible hand, which is so extractive and exploitive. So we need to figure out the way that we can use it to smartly do things that we are not doing now, and then continue to do the good things with it that we have. So I look forward to that, and we'll be publicizing that. We are in for the last 5 minutes.
Okay,
so yes, so
good.
now we're on the speed dial.
I was just thinking, there's so much we can say about renters, right? And I think one thing that's just, and I'm actually going to illustrate what we are going to try to do as a city. So the Burlington Housing Authority is one of our housing providers, nonprofit housing providers, that helps people of lower incomes be able to have affordable housing. And so think Decker Towers was in the news a lot about 2 years ago. So that is a BHA example property. Wharf Lane is another one as well. And one of the things that I wasn't as familiar with before I became mayor is that the city, through the mayor, appoints several members of the board of a housing authority. And that's the case for many large cities across the country. And so one of the things that I worked on since day one is to make sure that that relationship is a strong one, as well as supporting some of the ongoing chronic issues that some of those buildings have had with some of the larger issues in Burlington around community safety and folks who are unhoused, et cetera. I want to be really clear, they've made great progress, and I think it's due to the good, strong partnership between the city as well as the BHA board and staff and residents. A lot of the residents, back to organizing, have created resident councils. Decker Tower in particular is a great example of that, to advocate for what they need and to make sure that that agency is being responsive. And so I just recently met with the BHA board, and part of what we need to do even more with is help educating the community on the vouchers that exist, especially project-based vouchers, which are related to certain properties. Who can qualify? There's a lot more people who can qualify than they realize, and right now there's actually open units. So
really?
part of what we have to really do is make sure we're connecting those dots for folks, and that's why I want to just use this as a little mini commercial, nonprofit commercial, to say that there's a piece about A, knowing who qualifies, B, knowing that there's units available, and C, making sure we're demystifying some of the perception issues that has plagued Burlington, that we really are turning the corner on around the perception of safety in a building or a neighborhood in our community, because there's great units available, and we want to make sure we're matchmaking and supporting our housing authority in that important work.
Good. I think that we are really, really close. So we're going to have a conversation on this that's going to go into the next year. And I want to thank you. This has been great. You didn't think that you were here for an hour, but we have filled it very easily. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you learned something about this. We'll be back with some more specific details. This is Burlington Progressives TV. Good night.